when we're actually live. So maybe we're actually live right now. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Leadership Uncertain: Adventures in Confusion, Power, Love, and Dignity. It is an adventure every time we get together, Hugh. Very often you don't know where we're going because I have thoughts that I haven't shared with you. And I don't know where we're going because there is no telling where you're going to take us in response. Today, you mentioned some thoughts you'd had after last time where we talked about what is a leader's job anyway. So why don't I let you surprise me with where we begin?
So the me and my big mouth had to go tell the lady that we talked about. Remember I told you a story about this beautiful, wonderful human being that was at the gym that we got into this conversation and I had a chance to witness her and you had this beautiful thing
And
to
you had
say.
been running together, and she said, if I recall, Hugh, you're dragging your feet.
That's right.
Yes.
And she was kind enough to want to take care of me. And I recognized her at the end telling her that, she is the spirit of the place and
Mm.
she was wonderful and all the other things. So it somehow, I saw her the next day and I mentioned to her that I brought her up in this podcast that I was uh, participating in. And she was touched. And then I got a message from the owner of the gym who asked me for the link to the podcast. It seemed that she didn't somehow, for whatever reason, she didn't ask me for it directly, but she went and asked him if he could ask me for it. And I sent it to both of them. And all of a sudden, she had a chance to go experience it. And I found out the next day that she had sent it to all of her kids. And then, they were like, oh, he's talking about you, right, Mom? She didn't say anything. She just sent them the video and told them to go to this particular timestamp. And
That's excellent.
And they all figured out that it was her. And it was just a moment where she was able to be celebrated. So, we do these things because we're possessed somehow to share ideas and we imagine that people might find them useful. But here we are being able to actually lighten somebody's day just by talking about them when they're not here.
I love that. And in some ways, I think that's kind of the perfect segue into the ball I was thinking about throwing you as the prompt for today's conversation. And this is the second time actually today that I've been moved to, and now I'm really going to do it. Earlier today, somebody, just on my LinkedIn feed said, DM people today to say, I appreciate you for ... And I commented, I'm going to do it. And now, with your story, I was going to do it anyway. Now I'm going to do it at least 3 times rather than the at least once that I was talking about doing it before. So
Sure.
here's the ball I was going to throw you, and I feel sheepish doing this because I don't know that I've ever sung on a podcast before.
Oh no.
But I find this song is now playing in my head after the ball I was planning to throw you. So here I go, because if it scares me, I got to do it. What's love got to do with it? So the title of today's show is, what is the role of love in leadership, and in particular, what is the role of love in leading business?
When I was graduating from the 9th grade, I had a really awesome world history teacher that thought I wasn't very bright. Her name was Mrs. Garneff, and she gave me a dictionary. And in the front of the dictionary, she wrote the word agape. Now, if you are from agape, the Latin word, which means an over-abiding love for humanity. And that's the word that she used to describe me, because she was probably a little too shy to say that I was not potential. She called me a social butterfly because she didn't think I had the chops to be an intellectual heavyweight. So I thought about that. We want to go to. I wanted to go to a particular academic magnet school, and she didn't think I was smart enough. So when I graduated as its valedictorian, and I got to invite one teacher from my history to go to the ball, there was only one I could think of.
And was that a I'll show you invitation or a I love you invitation? What what was it?
So to remind you, in this dictionary, she wrote the word agape.
Yes.
And so therein lies the inspiration and hopefully the answers to some of those questions. No, there was not malice.
Uh-huh.
However, she had other favorites that she thought would have done well in the school that ended up both dropping out. And who cares about details? We appreciate inspiration and motivation from wherever they come. And it was nice because this woman unleashed so much creativity. She was arguably my favorite teacher throughout all of school.
Mm.
And so, the fact that she had her opinions and we had this moment, it was beautiful. I feel like this is a very pertinent question because we are in a very interesting race for the soul of our culture.
Mm.
On one hand, we are told we are successful when we create profit, we create culture, we create dynamic opportunities, and we're able to fill and find and fund people's retirements that work with us, that work for us, and we can design very strategically appropriate exits for our businesses,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are tasked with being able to hit sales quotas and sales revenues, and we are supposed to create customer synergies and other conceptual projections of how we represent, create, and engage value in our respective businesses.
Set goals, achieve. Yeah.
Celebrate, rinse, and repeat, right?
Right.
And you're supposed to be in a place of consistent, ruthless growth. And to be compassionate is lauded, but often cast as naive.
Mm.
And so, unfortunately, because I tend to enjoy being a little contrarian occasionally, I feel like all of that is true, and we get to breathe. And how do we breathe? We breathe by recognizing that the true keys to success in ways that we can measure and ways that we can't has to do with recognizing connection.
Mm.
Connection. I was once in an interview where I was interviewing this fellow to work for me, and he said, well, I believe that business relationships are so important. And I thought about what he said in a second, and I said, well, come to think of it, there are really no business relationships. There are relationships that have a context of business.
Mm.
But those relationships just have a context. If they're truly a relationship, there's a human being that sees another human being. And the extent to which that connection is truly authentic with the context of service and all the other things that are supposed to happen for the finance to also flow. But as the connection is proved to be authentic, the capacity for value to be transferred is so much greater. And then success, whether that be output, inspiration, engagement, profit, purchasing, whatever has to happen, is potentially clearer and more successful and more sustained because of the quality of that connection. And I will posit to you that at its deepest experience, that connection is love.
Hmm.
So I can honestly tell you that I love my customers.
I can honestly tell you the same thing.
I love my employees.
I even love the customers whom I've fired.
I love everyone with whom I have had the opportunity to authentically engage. Why? Because my results are better when that's the case. I am truthful. I am engaged. I am here. I am giving. I will not hold anything back, and I will unleash the full power of my intelligence to be in your service.
So both of the things that you've cited, you cited your agape teacher, and you've cited the depth of relationship that goes beyond the business context.
I don't know
Within
why
the
I feel
with
like
it
that.
stays
I
within
don't
the
know.
business context, perhaps, right? That it is the relationship is bigger than the label business that we put on it.
What I will say is the earth exists and the business context is the stock from which the seed gives birth. If
I
we
will
can
buy
agree
it.
on that. All right.
And it reminds me of Mrs. Kirschman. And
Tell me.
Mrs. Kirschman, I have tried to find many times in the last few years because I have such abiding appreciation and love for her.
Hmm.
And I believe I met her probably on the first day of ninth grade, I think. And she was not my first period, right? I mean, I think I must have gone to 5 classes or so before some seemingly large number of classes before I got to hers. And I walked into her room with an armful of stuff. I had, papers sticking out here and books sticking out there. I was just carrying a lot of stuff. I was, as you can see from my gestures, it was not an orderly stack of stuff. And she took one look at me and she said, speaking of learning a new word, she said, "You are discombobulated. Get out of my classroom and
Oh
come
wow.
back when you're not."
Oh wow. Okay.
And so I was completely taken aback and flummoxed. And I'm sure, I opened my and closed my mouth a couple of times. And I did. I got out of her classroom and I sat down in the hallway and I put my papers together. I think I even went to my locker and put a couple things in my locker. And I came back in the room. She looked up. I was, I suppose, combobulated. And she glanced at me and then went back to whatever it was that she was doing. I'm sure she was talking to the class. She glanced at me there was no assent other than her not telling me to leave again
Okay.
on my way to an empty desk. And that was the beginning of a beautiful, I notice I hesitate to call it friendship.
Sure.
I know she was married. I think that's about the only, I think she has had kids. That's the extent of the personal information I ever learned about her.
Right.
And she then later witnessed in me a facility with writing and she created an AP writing class for me. She said, "You could do this. So I'm going to create this and let me see who else we can bring into this class."
Wow. Talk about being seen.
Yes. So, it was an act of love to tell me, "You are discombobulated. Get out of my classroom."
Let's talk about that a little bit more because I feel like let's break that down to support the functional elements. Because we're not talking about Romeo and Juliet type love. What we're talking about, I think,
true story.
well, that's a story for a different day. But the idea is that you can see the other person being some amazing extension of yourself. And I think that's where compassion becomes functional. Where you can look at, and my best businesses that I've ever created have been from a place of, well, I'm only ever looking for me. The best businesses I've ever created have not started because I had some really great idea or that I had some market research for an opportunity that I wanted to go get into. No, it was because there was some problem that so frustrated me, that so moved me to either incompetence or spiritual malfeasance or psychotic breakdowns or transcendence or all of the above. And I got so pummeled, so challenged, that the resolution for how much I either succeeded or failed was that I would keep going and I would go do this for other people because nobody should have to experience X.
Yes, and nobody should have to experience X is a tremendous driver, and I would say is an expression of love.
Yes. So here's where I'm going to bring it home for you. So for me, in order to now go find customers from that place, I didn't have to look far because all I had to do was find myself, find people who cared about things that I cared about. And it's funny because for me, sales was something I had started so many businesses. I don't even want to tell you the number because it's embarrassing. I started so many businesses from a place of, I hate salespeople. I hate sales. I hate selling. I'm not good at it. And I would be willing to part with up to 50% of my equity just so that somebody could go deal with that trash because I'm too good for sales.
Oh, hey now.
Well, nothing like life to hand you a little bit of humble pie so that way you learn whatever it is you're supposed to learn.
Yeah.
So here's what I learned. I learned that when you start from a place of humility and love and service, selling is not trying to convince somebody to buy your stuff. For me, selling became, I'm going to tell you my story. I'm going to enroll you into a vision of what your experience could be. Now, if you choose to take this on yourself, you are enough and you can do it. And you don't need me. Just know you have a friend that understands what you're going through. But if you choose to alleviate yourself of the challenges that are coming based on what you've just told me you're into, write a check and learn from everything that I've gone through. Either way, I can either be over here or over here, but in both places, I congratulate you for being this far, and know that you are not alone. That became the sales process for us.
Yeah.
And at that level, for the first 5 years, I was closing 70% plus of my sales calls. And it was because I wasn't selling anymore. I was just simply connecting and finding those people with whom we shared that common need to not have this thing happen to both of us. It already happened to me. So you can learn from what I've gone through and just avail yourself and have a better experience. Your thoughts?
I told what I called it a success story this morning. I had a little bit of a workshop, a little webinar. I hesitate to call it a webinar because it was a live interactive kind of thing. You've seen me, right?
Yes.
There's no stand and deliver at the S-Works. So I told a story of a guy who was planning to work with us, planning to have us come in and train as managers and work with his team and improve communication and accountability. And he called me in a crisis because of a knockdown, drag out fight and then some really childish behavior in a leadership meeting. And I asked him to explain to me a little bit about how that happened and what was the backstory. And I remember saying, oh, well, I know the conversation I would have with these two leaders who were fighting. And if it were me, it would start with an apology. I owe you two an apology. But it would be one conversation with each of them. George, I owe you an apology. And the apology is, you've been phoning it in And I've been making it okay.
Wow.
So of course you've been phoning it in, because that's the standard that I set for you. It doesn't matter what I said. It only matters what I've been accepting. And so that's the apology I owe you. And I set you up for Jack over here to come down hard on you in that meeting, because I've been tolerating this standard. I've been making the standard different from what I've told Jack it was. And so he came down on you. I'm so sorry. Now, new conversation. Jack,
I'm sorry.
I owe you an apology. I told
Let this
you
happen.
this was the standard. I've created a different standard that George knew about. I told you this was the standard, and you thought you could expect what I told you to expect. And so I abdicated my responsibility. I'm so sorry for that. And then you raised your voice and you acted like a petulant child in the meeting. I understand why you did that. You should also know that's unacceptable. That can never happen again. And he had that conversation with those two fellas. They apologized publicly to everybody in the meeting. And then he said he didn't need to work with us anymore, because that resolved it. That started the ball rolling. That resolved everything. And so he ended up not writing a check. And I'm stoked.
Well, we got to figure out how to get you checks written for the masterful suggestions that you
well, and
send
so,
them a bill for
if I had it to do over again, I might say, tell you what, right?
Let's take you through exactly what's going to happen. Well, to your credit, absolutely. And to be fair to you, there are calls where I decide ahead of time, look, we're going to give something of value. We're going to have something of value happen here. And it might be enough for you to determine that working with us is not ultimately the right call for you. And to your point, I'm giving you crap just because I always want my friends to make money. But if it doesn't make sense for them to move forward and they don't feel like they need to, I'm not going to be anywhere that I'm not supposed to be. That's the other thing that I feel an adjacent point is, it's tough to be in a place of flow and connection when you're forcing things. You're forcing a sale. You're forcing a connection. You're forcing a relationship to exist financially that is contractual in nature, but not. Contracts have to exist. But the reason to do something shouldn't be based on the contract. The contract should reflect the nature of the connection that is supposed to unfold financially.
I'm really glad you brought up this word forcing, because it brings me back, not that we have ever left it, but it brings me back to love. I know one of my addictions, predilections, is to, when things aren't going the way I think they should be going, I whine about it. I whine to the people who aren't doing what I think they should be doing. I whine about it. Which is, I'm going to say, like, that's an abdication of love, right? I'd step outside of love and get into what should be, instead of recognizing what is. And I put both of us, I certainly put myself through pain, right? There's pain involved in thinking things should be different from the way that they are. And, what's graceful about the conversation that I recommended this fella have is that it restores love. You step out of whining, you recognize, and when I'm in my right mind, recognize what I've been doing that perpetuates the circumstances that I say I don't want. And then, without any pressure on the other person, this is not about I forget, I'm blanking on the word right now, but it is not about putting pressure on the other person, but to say, because of what I am responsible for, this is how I am going to behave in the given circumstances. So the part of the conversation with that fellow that I didn't just tell you about is, So by the way, I need you to step up and stop phoning it in. I need it to look like this. I need it to happen immediately. Or in order for me as the leader of this organization to be delivering for our customers the way we promise, I'm going to need somebody else to do your job.
Mm.
And that's incumbent on me as the leader.
So I appreciate everything you've just communicated.
And I can hear it coming.
And
Yes.
I offer a forked narrative. So not something that opposes, just a path to the right.
Yes. Bring it.
So for me, the opposite of should is can.
Can, C-A-N.
C-A-N. So what happens in my world is there's a standard. I find myself going down a path where I am resisting what is because some result is not meeting a standard that's in my mind.
Yeah.
I've assessed it. It should happen. It needs to happen. Bad things are going to happen if it doesn't happen. And the people involved are insert name that implies some form of incompetence or, some kind of
Lacking.
pejorative term.
Yes.
Some kind of lack. And then I wake up. And I remember, wait a second. 10 years ago, this was just me. 10 years ago, there was no goodwill. There was nobody else. I was doing all of these jobs. And so the requirement in order for me to be effective is for anybody to do 80%. What I mean. So if they can consistently do 80% of the thing that I used to do 100% of,
yep,
10% of the time, if they can hold 80% of the time,
that's good math.
That's
right?
Far more than I could have ever done.
Right.
And as long as I can keep repositioning them and finding a better use for their time, talents, etc., I remain responsible.
Yes.
And so in that moment, I wake up and I remember to take back responsibility. And what that looks like is recognizing that when I engage a person, I have an opportunity to do two things. I have an opportunity to clarify their thinking, and I have an opportunity to inspire confidence. Now, that's not to say I don't fire people. I fired someone just Friday, so somebody else is gone. However, if you are supposed to do something and you are cast to do that, and one of the ways you even come to work for us is you have to test and be aligned in such a way that everything about the job meets who you are, and we have not failed on any of the metrics getting to this point, then the next opportunity is for me to find a way to wield and feather your imagination and your inspiration into the outcome of whatever we create.
And for me as the leader to do a better job measuring, right? So that it's easier for you to know when you are succeeding. There are lots of things that we need to be doing that support the success of the people on our team.
So the only time, so you're hurting my brain again. And the word you're using that's hurting my brain is the word need. So when you tell me that something needs to happen, what occurs in my brain is the extinguishing of creativity, the extinguishing of transcendence. So you say, I need this to happen. I want to just say, screw you. You tell me, you know what, Aaron, you're the closest thing to Superman that I've met. What's possible, my friend? What can we get done today? This is a standard that gets to happen. We get to create the story together. What's an action that can happen right now so you are excited about making this the result that's underscoring and punctuating your humanity?
Fair enough, right? And so this is right here. We're getting into that to call it a business relationship is not incorrect.
Sure.
And it is not sufficient.
Sure. Because if I'm doing my job right, I don't want your business attention. I want the full effort. I want the full complement of your humanity.
Right
I
on.
want every ounce of your creativity pointed at our shared goals.
Right.
As a leader, my job is to have you realize that it's not me against you. We are standing shoulder to shoulder against that, whatever that is. And if we do it right, it's you, me, and the customer standing shoulder to shoulder against the data or whatever it is we're moving.
The chaos.
That's right. That's right. And so if I've done my job well, you should not be told, oh, you need to do this. It's, oh, we get to do this. And you control the narrative. Now, if the narrative is not something you want to control, let's find you something better to do. And if that's in the organization, fantastic. And if it's not in the organization, we love you and appreciate the door not slapping you too hard on the backside when you go. So it's all, I mean, it all works. And I can't tell you how many people I've fired, and we've had this conversation, where it's a place of compassion and understanding. And you know what? They knew that they were struggling, and we just stopped the suffering.
There you go.
Don't blame. There's not a sense of you are insufficient and so you don't make it. No, that's not the point at all. There's a role, there's a series of activities. You're either playing to the part or there's another part for you to go play. Right. And either way, your humanity absolutely matters and is treasured.
In fact, and I think we've had this conversation before as well, the last person I fired, at the end of the conversation, he said, "Thank you. I think of you as my business dad." And not for the first time, I said, "Man, I really love you," and I meant it. And one of the things that prompted me to have this conversation with you today, what's the role of love in leading a business, is that I recently conducted a LinkedIn survey. And I'm probably not going to quote exactly what the survey said, but it said essentially, if you knew that it was platonic, and if you trusted that it were true, would you want to hear from your supervisor, "I love you"? Often, sometimes, or never.
Wow.
And I was surprised by the results.
I have never wanted to hear it, but I find myself always giving it. That's curious. I'm probably going to have to go to my therapist about that one. Oh, I said it in a meeting. I was leaving a meeting and I was like, "I love you guys. I'm gone."
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
I remember not long ago, after a meeting where one of the people on my team said something that I thought kind of undercut her importance and what she's actually able to accomplish right now, which is arguably less than the ideal when she grows fully into her role. And I said, what I don't remember exactly what I said, but you know, she was talking about essentially like not really living fully into her title, which has to do with customer care. And I talked about all of the ways in which she enables me to give good care to the customers. And after the meeting, I asked her how she thought the meeting went, and I think I may have said something like, "I hope it was okay with you that I pushed back on your self-deprecating little comment." And she said, "I felt loved," and it was the first time that I said to her, You are. I love you.
Well, and I think this what you're describing is agape.
Yeah.
It's just focused. It's just focused. So
Yes.
the idea is that it's not clearly, the HR people are having a field day right now, but it's clearly not intended for any. It's not it's not designed to be intimate as it is designed to be inspired or inspiring. The desire is, yes, what do we want, right? We want to consistently convey, I see you, I hear you, you matter.
Mm-hmm.
And at its most frictionless, that feels like love, like brotherly or sisterly
Yeah.
love,
Right.
where we share the earth from which we emerge as blades of grass.
Right. And I think that there's I called it an act of love when Mrs. Kirschman said, "You are discombobulated, get out of my room." Because there are implications for my being in ninth grade in the school in which I was in ninth grade, right? Uh, I had already, even though she doesn't know me at all, didn't know my name at the time that she said that. There are things that she could surmise about how I got here. And so she was not going to permit me to argue for my chaotic limitations. This was an argument for my chaotic limitations. Everybody else came into the room in some semblance of order. I came
Mm.
disordered, which, was clearly at the very least uncomfortable for me. I was struggling to keep those things in my hands. And so when you say, I see you, and this is something you've said to me on more than one occasion in one way and another, it's I see you beyond how you see you right now.
Well, you raise an interesting point. I was watching some psychotherapist a couple of days ago that was offering advice on how to be more successful, and he was talking about high performers and how they have higher tendencies of sociopathy,
Hmm.
touches of narcissism, and neuroticism. And he explained how to achieve healthy levels of sociopathy, um, narcissism, and neuroticism. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And one of the very curious things that caught my attention, especially about the sociopathy, is that he talked about the fact that more successful people understand how to tap into and lean into long term empathy
Hmm.
as opposed
Hmm.
to short term empathy. And I thought that was curious. The idea that somehow you hear somebody, and very good therapists do this, and good CEOs understand how to not cater to calamity. At the same time, they understand, you know what? Chaos is here, and we will continue to step forward. We will not give in to the fear and the FUD and all that stuff. We will allow it to exist
Hmm.
in so much that we can neutralize it. But we're going to make long term moves, and we're not going to unsettle the cart just because somebody's having a bad time.
Hmm.
And what it was talking about was the opposite of that, where we get emotional. So the least effective people get emotionally sandbagged by chaotic influences. So somebody has a problem and you need to go help them. And we confuse that as potentially being quote unquote love. And for truly successful leaders, I think, to infuse love into their organizations, it's important for us to ride that line where we understand that sometimes a longer term, more strategic approach to supporting a person's success isn't just about coddling them, but rather creating a space in which they get to step into their own greatness, which is what it sounds like your teacher did for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
She was like, go figure yourself out and come back in when you're less of a mess. And you're not
Yeah.
going to mess my class up,
Right.
because there are other people that I have to manage their energies too.
Yes.
And if you come in looking like, was it Pig Pie was the Charlie Brown character that was so that was always like he was just like dusty all the time happening. She's able to manage, and in a way that's almost a sociopathic response.
Indeed.
No short-term empathy. Get out of my class.
But I don't even know you. I'm not going to ask your name.
Just get out. Get out and come back. But you know it was active when you walked back in. She looked at you and she didn't give you any kind of resistance.
Yeah.
And so there was a context for success.
Speaking of not coddling, you remind me of, you've been through, and some of your team has been through, a workshop that we do, fundamentals of legendary teaming. And in the first one, we do this exercise, and when we're in person, we do a different exercise than the one you've been through.
Okay.
And it happens in increasing levels of complexity. So in the first round, people basically, it's like, all right, we can run this operation. We may be stumbling here and there. We can basically run it. We go, okay, we're going to add this operation. We're going to run both of these operations at the same time. And people go, oh, no. And then they fail a fair amount. They get a little better. Then we add a third. We're going to say, okay, we're going to run this operation at the same time, all three of these operations at the same time. And people squawk and protest. And they generally, it's kind of a train wreck.
Okay.
And then we say, all right, so here's the fourth operation. And before we even say anything, they can see where it's going. And people are, oh, no. Oh, my goodness. We hear all of this grumbling. And they never got good at running all three. When we add the fourth one, very often it clicks into place. And there's nothing magic about the number 4. Sometimes it's between 4 and 5. Sometimes it's between 2 and 3. There's so often a number where when we push people past what they think they can do, there's just too much for them to allow the mental chaos, and getting the mental chaos out of the way. Suddenly, they're capable of far more than they thought they were capable of.
So when I was 17, there was a speed reading advertisement that came over the radio, and my father bought it for me at age 17. And the author of the course, a fellow that I've known for 20 years, he taught a particular technique called frustration training. So one of the things you had to do was you had to frustrate your brain in order to improve and increase your reading speed. And he was unbound. I tell you, he introduced some of the most creative approaches I'd ever seen. But it worked because I ended up getting, great scores on all my AP and IB tests. And I was able to skip a year in college and blah, 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 blah. The rest is history. Well, anyway, part of the exercise, and you might like this. You take a book and you don't you skip through it and you just kind of scan the pages. And then you start photocopying it. So you're not allowed to spend any more than 1 second on any page, but you got to keep going. And then he has you turn the book upside down and start reading it backwards. And you got to go even faster. And then after a minute of doing that, you got to start again at the back of the book, one eye closed, and you got to switch eyes open and close every 5 pages. So you you switch, and and you're going backwards in the book, and you're switching, and then the music switches, and it's all to music. You turn it back right side up, and then you got to read it normally. And normally, after all of that, whatever your tested reading speed was, you've tripled it by the time you get back to it. Because what happens is you frustrate yourself to the point where it's so hard to read all this stuff upside down, and he has you, and then, there was software back in those days, And so what they would do is they'd turn the page purple and then turn the page white. And then so this was a software to help improve your reading speed. And then all of a sudden it's right side up and the music is at 3,500 words a minute. And you're just relaxing into 3,500 words a minute. And so by reading at 3,500 words a minute, I got 5s on all of my written AP exams, and I was able to just have time to the way I was able to get through all those exams is I had time to read all the passages, because the conditioning was of such that the frustration had allowed us to get to a place where the operating parameters of the brain were just used to a higher level of just pain. But we had to intentionally force ourselves beyond it so we could come back to something that was tolerable. It was a very effective technique.
Wow.
I don't know, that their story just inspired. I forgot about that whole thing when I was 17 or 18 is when that course happened in my life.
Yeah. Right on. So, what's the role of love in leading business? I mean, we've talked about not letting people argue for their limitations.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about compassion, and compassion for the long term rather than just the momentary. Which I think of. I think of the pain involved in taking out a splinter. Right. For a kid, it's like, okay, my kid just got a splinter. They are not going to like this. This is going to suck. And then she's not going to have a splinter.
Mm.
Yeah. A couple of thoughts.
Well, and as you go through that, I also think about the fact that I think leadership really is an outgrowth of your ability to get something done with a group of people. Mm-hmm. But that is simply a mechanism to convey sustained connection, right? What is a business? As its core, your desire to create value. Why are you creating value? Because people need services. Well, the best consulting services out there, and this is again the Dan Sullivan model, we've talked about this a few times, where he says that if you ever want to be in a business that isn't commoditized, meaning your customers are coming to you for something that's more than just the price of the thing you're selling. If you are going to escape commoditization, you have to provide 3 things in excellence. You have to provide L, which is leadership, which is taking people through the darkness, having a plan for those who are planless or who need to outsource the plan for whatever they're trying to get done. Relationship, which, yes, you are leading them through the dark, but they also have to know that they are not alone. They're not alone. And then the third component of the Dan Sullivan method for escaping commoditization is creativity. So your customer has to be delivered a service in which they get to imagine themselves as being something better, different, more satisfying than they are right now. In my mind's eye, I can think of no other 3 components or experiences that don't describe a great, loving relationship where you are there to take someone through the darkness. They are not alone, and you stand witness, if not inspiration, for them to reimagine their lives. You do it for your kids, you do it for your spouse, you do it for your parents in some cases, especially when they get to certain transitional experiences. You do it for your cousins and your brothers and the people in your family and the people at your church. You do it for your PTA and for your community service organizations. These are the things that consummate your human experiences.
Yep.
And I would argue that you are at your most effective and you are basting in your best integrity when you bring that to the workplace.
Agreed. You know, and it brings me back to the distinction between this business relationship
Mm.
and a relationship. There's something in the narcissism that you bring up, right? Is if I am full on in full on narcissism mode, then you are an instrument to help me get what I want. The end. That's a business relationship. And I've had those, right? I mean, I have a business relationship with Amazon.
Right.
Right? It's like, I need that thing. You've got it at a price I can live with. You know,
Let's
I'm
go.
going to get it, and the end. And so what's the role of love in leadership and leading business is to go beyond, in my view, to go beyond simply that business relationship, that narcissistic, you, the employee, are a means to an end for me, the end. And I think about the people for whom, even if I haven't spoken to them in 20 years, for whom I still have some care, some hope that they are doing well, occasionally even some interest that leads me to look them up, find them, communicate with them, say, hey, I was just thinking about you. And, you know, not only is work more fulfilling that way, I certainly find that some of the revenue that we make comes from not intending that this will come from that, but that it does.
Well, that's the other thing that we're going to talk about. You know, the one of the most powerful concepts that comes from this book, I think it's called it's either the omnivore's dilemma or defense of food. It's one or the other. Effectively, it talks about the nature of fertilizer. So you'll hear me use shorthand, and I'll say to you NPK.
Yes, you've talked
NPK
about this before.
stands for sodium, phosphorus, and potassium. Those are the three ingredients in some of the most effective fertilizers on the planet. The problem is that when you focus in on just using those three, you end up making incredible food that's really not that nutritious anymore. And
You get the macronutrients while the micronutrients are depleted.
That's right. And so what ends up happening is because we run the risk of being so hyper focused on the outcome that we forget some of the nuances,
Yep.
the stuff that goes into the stuff, right?
Yeah. When was the last time you had a tomato that really tasted great? Right.
Exactly. Or a
It's
banana.
big, it's beautiful, it's juicy,
And it's empty.
fabulous.
And it's empty.
Yeah.
And so we have to be careful when we have objectives that are so strategically engaged and there's only one way to measure them that we lose the magic that happens on the outskirts. And what I've learned is that some of those relationships that are just, you feed them because they're there to be fed. There are people on the other side that if you take just an extra 30 seconds to connect and appreciate their humanity, you have no idea. And I'll say this in the business all the time. We will have projects that are $1,000 and we will have projects that are $100,000. And I make sure that the folks that work with us do not delineate or discriminate service by the amount that we're being paid, because you have no idea what a good story is worth.
Someday, maybe if I haven't already, I'll have to tell you my experience at Canless Restaurant in Seattle as relevant to that. It's too long a story to tell now. And I'm reminded of two things. One is, in addition to the Canless story, one is a Chris Voss quote I'm sure I've mentioned before. Never be so sure of what you want that you wouldn't take something better instead.
Yes.
which in turn, I think of Mario Battaglia, celebrity chef, who only ever intended to have one restaurant in New York. That's all he ever wanted. And he tells a story of waking up one morning and realizing that his sous chef has outgrown him. Any day now he's going to leave, he's going to go study with somebody else, or he's going to open his own restaurant. And so what Mario did is create way bigger problems than this guy quitting. He woke up one morning, he bought a new restaurant, gave this sous chef 50% ownership in that restaurant and said, this is yours to be the head chef at and to own 50% at of go. And so now not only does he not have a sous chef, he's got to replace the sous chef. Now he's got 50% ownership in a brand new restaurant that is likely to fail.
Figure it out. Yes. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That is another act of love in a relationship that transcends, I've got this goal and you exist to help me reach it.
And I think to cap everything that we've said today and bring this to an end, how do we make it functional? Because I hear my friend Robert Sheeman always say to me, well, Hugh, how am I going to actually use this? And I would say it would infuriate me because I don't ever speak theoretically. Everything I talk about is relevant until I recognize that other people. Anyway, so what I would tell you is we start with the next conversation. Are you listening? And as we engage, are you listening to the point where you can hear the breath of the other person talking? Are you giving them space to explore their humanity? Are you sharing things from a place that promotes you as a person or from a place that serves them in elevating their station in life?
I love it.
These are considerations which you can test immediately.
Yes.
And it's the quickest and easiest way to practice love professionally.
Are you saying in your head when you are frustrated, you aren't enough? Or are you saying, I think you're capable of more?
Perfect. And I realize I probably start with one and have to transition quickly to the other. So the frustration yields to,
this is the cue.
I'm doing it.
Here I am.
I'm doing it. I'm doing it right now. And that's right. Because guess what happens when I play by the other rules and I'm being dysfunctional again? Here we are. Yeah.
Right on. Well, Hugh, I love you.
I appreciate you too, my friend.
And that's a true story. All right, folks.